Yes, got it.
All right, it's on.
Okay.
All right, now I want this back to small screen. However, I did that. Oh, struggle is real. Ah, there we go. I just want to be able to see what I'm reading. Oh, it's because I'm recording it. That's why it's doing that. Okay. Minimize. Oh, can't do that either. All right. Well, anyways, so we're gonna talk about the case, Greg's case, and then the whole process of how a student is placed in more restrictive settings. So what I gathered from it was that I don't know, I felt like we could really both relate to this case with some of the students and situations we've been going through at work. And let's see here. So talking about how the placement process and how a child is placed in more restrictive settings. So from what I was reading from the article was that when deciding on a student's placement, a collaborative team must consider the individual needs of the student, determine the student's special education and related services, and then identify the least restrictive setting in which the student's IEP can be successfully implemented. And I felt like during this case, reading it, that was not how they followed the placement process or whatever. I felt like they wanted to just skip right past the whole process and get him into a more restrictive setting.
Yeah.
The IDA requires that a student's IEP to be developed and then the student's placement be decided based on their IEP. And I felt like that wasn't how they did it. Like they had a IEP made, but they didn't update it properly before they decided that they were going to try to put him in a different setting, a more restrictive setting.
Yeah, because then they had him in the learning disability and then they put him in EBD, but right as they did it, they like wanted to move him to a different, right?
Yeah. And they only had him, they could have kept him at the school for a little bit and tried out having some social skills and having him take the BASC test assessment. And then, but they just decided to do those assessments and then send them off to a different school. Actually, I think they sent them to that other school first, right? And then they came back and then they said it wasn't working.
Yeah.
They said it wasn't
What?
working. And then they did the BASC test.
Yeah.
So they kind of did it all backwards.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it
Um,
wasn't like convenient trial either. It was like way out of the way for the family.
yeah, it was like a 45-minute drive, which another thing that I was reading about in this article is that you're supposed to really try to place them in, obviously in their in their homeschool area, but not somewhere that's extremely far away. I felt like there was something that could have been closer. And then some other notes that I took was that when the IEP teams reverse the order by determining a student's placement prior to developing their IEP, as was depicted in the scenario at the beginning of this article, they could very likely be found to have violated the IDEA, which they definitely did. And then that's because the placement comes first, or when the placement comes first, the IEP team must then fit the program to the particular setting and what the student is placed, thus making a placement decision. The IEP team determines where and how the student will receive the special education and related services described in their IEP. And they did it all backwards.
They diagnosed and then they were like, see ya.
Yeah. They're like, oh, that doesn't sound like something we can work with, even though we didn't even try.
Yeah.
And then to ensure students with disabilities To ensure students with disabilities are educated in the LRE, the least restrictive environment, that is the most appropriate for the individual needs. The IDEA requires school districts to have a range or a continuum of alternative placement options to meet their unique academic and functional needs, which they failed to do that. They just gave them the one option.
They just kept pushing that too.
Yeah.
You know, and they kept trying to get them to go to that school instead.
And the purpose of the continuum is to allow school personnel in consultation with the student's parents to choose from a number of options in determining the LRE that is most appropriate for the student. And they definitely did not do that. I felt like the parents didn't even have much of a say. They didn't even really want him to do it, like the trial. And then
Yeah. But I think they just felt hurt and probably didn't feel like they had a whole lot of choice
Yeah.
because they weren't given any.
Right.
And then they probably agreed to the trial.
Which,
and he wasn't consistent progress. So it was like, well, what's the point in this 40 or 50 minute commute?
right. Which made
Yeah.
me think of like some of our students, how I felt like one of our case managers was trying to pressure one or two of our students to go to a program right away instead of trying all the least restrictive procedures, which was putting a para with them a little bit more and having them get pulled out for services in our room. And I don't know, it's just like reading it and then seeing it really stands out to me now. And I really want to make sure I don't do something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and then another thing that I had noticed with like the IEPs was that even when they did kind of address the EBD diagnosis, like it was just like all negative and negative consequences, and it didn't really touch much on the positive or like how they were going to address it. It was just the punishment and the negative.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, I don't know, that made me sad because you want to say what his gains and like his strengths and things like that too, not just what he's struggling with.
Yeah.
And then I also wrote like when placement team members recommend a placement option that is more restrictive than the general education classroom, they should be confident that they have made good faith efforts to maintain students in less restrictive environments through the use of supplementary aids and services, which they definitely did not do that. I don't even know if they even gave him a para. Did they even, I can't remember, did they say anything about giving him a para?
I don't remember anything that specified a para. I remember all I saw that I remember, because I can't pull it up right now, was the timeouts.
That's right. So they didn't even try to give him a para. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I
would think that'd be one of the first things you try, but
right. And then pulling them out more and getting them some social skills groups.
For sure. Yeah.
And then another thing I had learned is that IEP teams also need documentation that will support their decision to place a student in a more restrictive setting. This observation is confirmed by the requirement in the IDEA that compels IEP teams to justify situations in which students are placed in more restrictive settings. So in such cases, the IEP of the students must include an explanation of the extent, if any, to which the child will not participate with non-disabled children in the regular class and in extracurricular and non-academic activities, which I guess I do know that because I've filled that part out, but I don't know, it just made me think.
Well, and like I saw that they talked about like 22, I don't know, I think it was like 22, but it talked about like all these things that he had done that were like aggressive and talking back or whatever the word that he had done. But then they didn't say anything about the interventions or the strategies that they used to counter those. All they did was, hey, he did 22 bad things or whatever, you know.
Yeah, they didn't do any FBA reports or observations. They just kept saying, the referrals. There was like a ton of referrals, which
Yeah.
We have that at our school too, but that's not, we need
Yeah.
something more than that. We need an
Yeah.
FBA report
Mm,
because we need to figure out what the trigger was and why he's acting and where he's acting. You can't just say, oh, these are all his behaviors. There's a whole list of them. All right, why is he acting that way? What is he doing? Like, why is he, or where is he doing it? How often?
mhm.
But yeah, and then I wrote down like each public school district must ensure that a full continuum of education placements is available to meet the needs of the students with disabilities. So like the continuum includes instruction in the general education classroom. Then you have special classes, then special schools, then if it gets really intense, then home instruction, and then the last option would be instruction in hospitals and institutions. So public schools must also make available supplementary services such as a resource room and itinerant instruction when necessary to be provided in conjunction with general education placement, which they didn't do any of that. Or at least they
Yeah.
didn't report back that they did any of that.
Well, if they had, I would assume that they would report that.
Right. Oh, what a
Yeah.
mess. And this probably happens so often too.
Yeah. Most to our EBD friends, right? Like, I could see it happen.
Yep, just ship them off just because they seem too tough.
Mhm.
Um, and then like, yeah, with the purpose of the continuum is to allow school personnel in consultation with the student's parents to choose from a number of options in determining LRE that is most appropriate for the student. And then it says the continuum does not require that all student or that all school districts have the complete continuum within the district boundaries, which makes sense because there's, the setting fours or they could be all the way, 45 minutes away for the closest one that's connected with the school district and whatnot. I know it's a huge wait list to get into those programs too. So
Yeah. Well,
um
of the case, I can't get it to pull up, but I thought that it even had mentioned something about like at the very end after they had done the hearing, that they had found something closer. They did something even at the school. I don't know. After the hearing, though, I don't remember.
let's see here.
But then at that point, it was kind of like they had to, so they didn't really
Yeah, I
have a
thought he
choice.
ended up getting to stay. Let's see here. Um,
But if they did have something there and had an option, that's even more frustrating.
right. Um, trying to find.
I might not have said that exact thing. I'm not really sure, I guess.
Well, it
Could be
definitely
Nate.
said like. Uh, I mean, I know it says that. Greg was not successful, although it may well be that Greg requires a placement other than the resource room for students with learning disabilities. The district's evidence fell far short of establishing that the proposed alternate placement program was warranted. Says that the hearing officer urged the parties to cooperate in Greg's best interest. He will be of school age for a few more years and will undoubtedly continue to need special education related services. Maybe it doesn't.
It might not. I might have remembered it wrong too.
I don't know, there's a lot that I was reading, I feel like.
Yeah.
Well, all right, and then what else do I got for notes? I put, if a child with a disability has behavior problems that are so disruptive in a regular classroom that the education of other children is significantly impaired, the needs of the child with a disability generally cannot be met in that environment. However, which is interesting because I think about some of our friends right now. So
Yeah,
like
for sure.
I wonder what they're gonna do next. Like if they're gonna I know they're gonna meet with the principal and talk maybe more about the one student, but I mean,
Yeah.
how much is enough is enough, or like how much? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it says like, however, before making such a determination, LEAs must ensure that consideration has been given to the full range of supplementary aids and services that could be provided to the child in the regular educational environment to accommodate the unique needs of the child with a disability. But it's like our friend already has a one-on-one para practically all day, which apparently that's already a setting two thing. And I don't know. It'd be interesting.
Wonder, is it, I don't know, is it a normal thing to do like several or at least a couple like social skills a week? Because I mean, I know that friend only has one.
Yes.
So
Maybe you could recommend that. Maybe that would be.
when I was talking to the principal too, because we were brainstorming.
Oh,
So
nice.
I didn't say it to her, but because I should, but
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, because they'll take anything at this point. But yeah, he needs it for sure. I know the littles get a lot more days a week for social skills. Mine are older, upper grade level, so they only have it once a week. But
right. When he has all that free time and after lunch, that's too. I don't know if they could squeeze that in. He wouldn't like it, but
I mean, you
oh
gotta
well.
do what you gotta do. You gotta incorporate. You gotta make it the least restrictive environment. And right now, he needs more services or something.
Then.
Um. So then I also found this, I said, like, some good information to know is that when the general education classroom is clearly inappropriate for a student, however, it is not required that a student be placed in the general education classroom to fail prior to being moved to an appropriate but most restrictive placement, which
Mhm.
comes into play where you fill out the whole IEP and everything and figure out how much service minutes they need, and then base it off of where they would be best
Yeah,
placed.
right.
Yeah, and then like the stuff for the additional placements requirements for IDEA. So when making placement decisions, these requirements include the following: determine a student's placement at least annually, so updated
Yep.
every year. Then educate a student in the school as close to home as possible, which they were failing to do that. Unless the IEP requires some other arrangement, educate a student in the school they would attend if not disabled. Consider any potential harmful effects or a placement may have on the student or on the quality of services that they need, and then consider any potential harmful effects on the student's peers, which, I mean, Greg was having a lot of those issues, but it makes me think again back to our friend who's having the same issues, like he's becoming harmful to the students and teachers now.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
We have the same thing with I mean, the parent in the scenario, and the parents are both kind of
yeah,
reluctant.
yeah.
It is.
Um,
But
so,
again, we're saying
right. Yeah, we're not just shipping them off, so.
I don't think,
Um,
even if we did try that, which we wouldn't, but
yeah. So yeah, basically it just for a discussion, I mean, it was basically a discussion, I think. I mean, it says at the end of the case study, think about the placement process and how the child is placed in more restrictive settings. So we kind of talked about that. I mean, basically talked about that, and then you should consider these thoughts in the light of all content included in this module. I mean, it made me think back a lot of what we're going through at work. So that was kind of cool to talk about.
Yeah, it makes me feel a little bit better because at least we're trying things with ours,
Yeah,
even though it's very difficult.
yeah. Um, here. Yeah, I think that's all we needed to talk about. I mean, from what I understood.
Okay.
Um, all right. Well, I will stop recording.